where the history of the game was, this was a game that was created by AKI, who are now known as Sing Company. They've made other different games like WCW versus the World for the PlayStation, Virtual Pro Wrestling, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 for the N64 and that kind of stuff. And they ended up getting the license to make games as well for the N64 with WCW, making the games which then went on to garner and popularize them so much through these games that their games that they created are still played nowadays and are still played in tournaments. With the first game being WCW versus nWo World Tour, as well as Virtual Pro Wrestling, where with Virtual Pro Wrestling was only released in Japan, but with WCW versus nWo World Tour, that was released all across the world for the N64. And this was the first game that I ever played and had from WCW. I remember going out, because we used to buy all the wrestling games when I was a kid. We also had Warzone as well from Acclaim. Now, Warzone was a really crap game. Warzone was shit. You know, compared to them playing this game, I was so jealous of the WCW fans, because this game to me was 10 times as better as Warzone. It was just a better game in general, and I was actually preferred, which is crazy for me, a WCW product over a WWF one. Where for it being the first WCW game we bought, because even though there was a few other WCW games like Super Brawl for the SNES, etc., this one was the first one that we saw properly. And with it being way better than Warzone, where with the fucking shitness that is Warzone, you would have to do so many different combinations and so many different buttons you would have to press to do a finishing move. Where with WCW versus nWo World Tour, it was as simple as hard grapple, spin the analog stick, and it's done. You know, it's that for me is just how much more better and simpler, and everything else in between is just how good WCW versus nWo World Tour was. And also as well, it was one of those games that even though I played the Acclaim games like Warzone and Attitude so many times, and I loved those games because obviously you do as a WWF mark as much as I am, that I actually went back and played more of World Tour because it was a better game in general. And it was just a game that I went and played a lot until the next game came out, being Revenge. And it also was one of those games that I wanted AKI to make the WWF games, and then when they finally did WWF WrestleMania 2000, which I'm going to talk more in that review, I was so happy that AKI had the WWF now. The gameplay to this game is really, really good. Even though it's the first of this series of different games that AKI made, you could see the foundation of how good these games were going to be and just how good these games went on to become, with stuff like Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 and WWF No Mercy being lauded by a lot of different people, besides Here Comes the Pain as the greatest wrestling game ever. For me, WWF No Mercy is still the greatest wrestling game ever. I think that game's great. It's so much fun, and you can see with this game itself just the foundations of the amazing gameplay, the simplicity of how to do different moves, where in the Acclaim games you would have to do ridiculous different combinations of things to do certain moves and special moves, where with this one all you would need to do is either press a hard grapple with a directional you want to do and then hard grapple again, and he did it. Could even work with light grapple. You had different strikes. It was easy to run, it was easy to pin, it was easy to do moves from the top rope, it was easy to do flying moves, it was easy to pick up and use weapons. You know, this game was just so simple but so hard to master that it was just an amazing game. It was just brilliant. The content was really good too. You had a massive selection of wrestlers you had all the different factions, you had even though you had some Japanese wrestlers involved in the game as well, because obviously being AKI being a Japanese company, they wanted to add a few Japanese wrestlers in. You had different promotions that you had like DOA, etc. You also had WCW faction and the nWo faction. Also as well, the arenas were pretty cool. Like, even though the arenas themselves weren't based on specific WCW pay-per-view sets, but they were just based on the different factions in the game. Like, you had the WCW ring the DOA ring, for example, and stuff. Also as well, unlike Warzone, the amount of wrestlers that you had was vastly more, where with nWo versus WCW versus nWo World Tour, you had about 30 to 40 wrestlers, where on Warzone you had about 20 wrestlers, so you had more wrestlers to play as. All the wrestlers were very distinct and very different to each other. They all weren't the same in their moveset and the stuff that they did, where in Warzone they were very similar. The only difference that they had between all of them were the special moves that you can do, but even then you had to do a massive combination that if you couldn't do it properly, I could never pull off a stunner, so I literally just did normal moves and won that way in that game. The submissions were great. You were able to TKO your opponent as well. I absolutely adored the spirit meter and how when you used to do more taunts or more moves to your opponent, it would go up. Their spirit would go down, where unlike Warzone, to win a match, you would have to get them down to red, where in this one, it was more like how a wrestling match would normally be. Like, you might have so low spirit, but then you can finally able to kick out at the end. I loved that. Also as well, you couldn't keep a special move all the time. When you were able to build up your meter to then able to then pull off the special move, you had a certain amount of time limit to do it, where you would, like do in a normal wrestling match, so your opponent is able to get out of the ring or move away from you, so you weren't able to pull off your special. Also as well, this game had fatigue. Like, unlike Warzone and Attitude, you didn't really have fatigue. You did in a sense where it was more red, but in this one, it's just more fatigue in a sense of, oh, they're a bit groggy. Where in this one and then in later games, if you focus on a specific body part, you could see the damage happen to that wrestler. And I just fucking loved that. I just thought, for me, it was amazing. Just so good. Amazing stuff. And just the gameplay overall was just such great stuff. Just adds more to the immersiveness of wrestling, so you feel like you're actually in the match. Also as well, the design is great. Like, even though it's the first of an amazing series of 4 games, and you could see the design and everything going better and better and better, but for being the first one, I still think it's great. The wrestlers look like the wrestlers. The way that the models work and how they move and stuff is greatly done. The sound design is great as well. Like, all the different moves, all the different chops, punches, slams, etc. all sound great. They all have that amazing, like, bang sound that you expect from a wrestling match. Also as well, the sound of the mat sounds really cool as well. The sound of obviously the 1, 2, 3, the crowd are great as well. The taunting works really well. Like, if you're taunting as a heel, the fans boo. If you're taunting as a face, the fans cheer. And also as well, for being the first of a series of it being quite sort of like, not simple, but more sort of like primitive, and kind of compared to the later games, the design is still top notch, and it's still a game that you can go back and be like, yeah, this game design is still really, really cool. The soundtrack's great. The sound design is brilliant. Yeah, some good stuff. Also as well, the story and the career mode is quite simple compared to the later ones. What you have in Revenge and WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy, you have more and more. Where with this one, when you beat a certain league and you beat their champion, you become the champion of that league, like the WCW champion or the US champion, for example, or the nWo champion, etc., etc., etc. You would then unlock a character, where this gives you more of that sort of like going on to the repeatability. You are able to go through and beat all these different wrestlers, and you can then do the difficulty on higher to see how you do. And it's quite simple in a sense that with the story mode career, you have a certain amount of matches you have to wrestle in, where if you do a Pacific higher league or a bigger championship, for example, you would have to wrestle more wrestlers to then unlock the wrestler to then unlock. And with the repeatability of this, it adds more, so you want to play through the game, and maybe you want to change your champion of that division or the faction, for example. So you might be like, all right, I want Hulk Hogan to be the champion, but actually no, I want to make it to be Sting to be the champion. And it gives you that sort of like coolness of the career mode and the story mode, where you're able to kind of make whoever you want to be the champion. Even though it's quite simple, it is still great, because through the later games you can see just how much more and how much more greatly evolved they become. Also as well, like I said earlier with the repeatability, this game has tons of it. This is one of those games that, even though it's the first of the mainline series from AKI, you can see how it's the foundation, but it's still one of those games that you can still go back and play because it has great gameplay. It has a great career mode you can do, which is quite simple. We have to go through and beat a different amount of opponents who then fight the champion, who then you can then win, and you have a thing that says, congratulations, you are the champion. The fact as well, you have all these different types of wrestling matches. You have tag team matches, triple threat matches, singles matches and stuff you can add to it as well. You can also add all the different modes you want as well. So if you want a match that has no disqualification, no count out or no pinfalls, you can do that. Also as well, it gives you the option of being able to wrestle as whoever you want against whoever you want. Doesn't matter if it's a cruiserweight versus a heavyweight, you can do that. And it's also just one of those games that you can replay and look back at all the different wrestlers that were there at the time. Like, you can be like, oh my god, in 97 they had people like Sting, Hogan, Savage, Nash, Six before he went to WWF. You know, all those different people, you can kind of play it for that as well, which is why I love playing old school wrestling games, because it's one of those things you love playing for the repeatability, is just being able to play these old wrestlers and seeing who was there at the time, and in this game to be like, oh my god, I remember him. Oh no, he's sadly passed away. Oh my god, whatever happened to him? And it's kind of thing. It's one of those cool things. It adds that sort of aspect to the repeatability too. And it's just one of those games that, unlike Warzone and Attitude, because even though I own the games multiple times because I'm collecting wrestling games as one of my things, it's that and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games. I'm like collecting them to add to a collection of different wrestling games. So I'm like getting all the different games from Atari, SNES, NES, N64, Dreamcast, you name it. I've gone out and bought these games. I've even bought the same game on multiple different consoles, because I want to collect as many and all wrestling games as I can. And it's one of those games that, even though it's the simplest and the most sort of like first and the foundation of what the later games became and how much more better they are, this game is still a game that I can highly repeatedly play and highly recommend for people to play, to see just how good the AKI games are, that even with being in a sense, the foundation of the series, just how good this game actually is. And so then, guys, overall, I'll give this game 4.5 out of 5. The reason I give this game this score is this game is fantastic. The gameplay is brilliant. The design is fantastic. The amount of content you get with this game is great. You can see in the foundations of the game just how it would go on to become an even better series with Revenge, WrestleMania 2000 No Mercy, for example. You can also see as well with the amount of content you can do, with the amount of repeatability this game has. Just everything about this game is just great and deserves to be played again and deserves to be appreciated more as the underrated classic that it truly is.